The moment my son laughed at his own mother in front of 200 wedding guests, I realized I no longer recognized the family I had spent my entire life building. My name is George Whitmore, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of disappointment a man could face. I was wrong. The afternoon had begun like something out of a magazine. The ceremony was being held at a beautiful country venue outside Nashville, Tennessee. White chairs lined a green lawn. Soft music drifted through the warm spring air, and my granddaughter Emily looked radiant as she prepared to marry the love of her life. My wife Helen stood beside me, elegant in a light blue dress she had spent weeks choosing. After 47 years of marriage, she still cared about looking her best for family events. I remember watching her smile as guests arrived, greeting everyone with the same kindness she had shown people her entire life. Helen had always been the heart of our family. She remembered birthdays, mailed anniversary cards, baked pies for neighbors, and somehow made every holiday feel special. If anyone deserved respect, it was her. Unfortunately, not everyone saw it that way. My daughter-in-law Ashley had spent years treating Helen as if she were an inconvenience rather than family. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious enough to start an argument. Just small comments. Excluded invitations. Dismissive looks. The kind of behavior that leaves no visible bruise but slowly wears a person down. I noticed it. Helen noticed it too. But she always told me to let it go. Family is family, she would say. It isn't worth making trouble. That afternoon, after the ceremony ended, guests moved toward the reception area near a large outdoor pavilion. The ground had been damp from a storm the night before, and a few muddy patches remained near the garden walkway. Helen and I were making our way toward our assigned table when everything changed. Ashley approached from behind. I saw her smile. I saw her glance toward a group of guests. Then I saw Helen stumble unexpectedly near one of the muddy spots beside the path. She lost her balance and sat down hard in the wet ground. The entire moment lasted only seconds. Gasps rose from nearby guests. A few people rushed forward. Helen looked stunned, her beautiful blue dress stained and her hands trembling slightly as she tried to compose herself. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then came the sound I will never forget. My son Ryan laughed. Not an awkward chuckle. Not nervous laughter. He laughed loudly enough that people turned to look at him. Ashley covered her mouth and pretended to be concerned, but I noticed the smile in her eyes. Helen lowered her gaze. The humiliation on her face hurt me more than anything I had experienced in years. I walked over immediately and helped her to her feet. She tried to smile and tell everyone she was fine. That was Helen, always protecting others from discomfort, even when she was the one suffering. As I brushed dirt from her sleeve, I looked directly at Ryan. He stopped laughing, but he never apologized. Not to me, not to his mother, not to anyone. In that moment, something cold settled inside my chest. I helped Helen into the venue and quietly led her toward a private room where she could clean up. She kept insisting it was an accident. She kept defending people who did not deserve her loyalty. I listened without arguing. But as I closed the door behind us, I made a decision. I would not confront anyone that day. I would not raise my voice. I would not ruin Emily's wedding. Instead, I would wait. Because sometimes the most important truths reveal themselves only after people think they have gotten away with everything. The drive home felt much longer than the 40 miles it actually was. Helen sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window as rolling Tennessee farmland passed beneath the fading light of the evening sky. She had changed into a spare outfit that one of Emily's bridesmaids had kindly found for her, but the embarrassment from earlier still lingered. I could see it in the way she folded her hands in her lap and avoided looking at herself whenever we passed a reflective window. For most of our marriage, Helen had been the strongest person I knew. She had endured financial struggles when we were young, cared for aging parents without complaint, and supported our family through every challenge imaginable. Yet what happened that afternoon seemed to affect her in a different way. It was not the muddy dress. It was not even the fall itself. It was the realization that her own son had found amusement in her humiliation. About 20 minutes into the drive, she finally spoke. "Ryan probably did not mean anything by it," she said softly. "Sometimes people laugh when they feel uncomfortable." I kept my eyes on the road. "Maybe," I replied. Helen nodded as though she wanted to believe it herself. The silence returned. When we arrived home, the familiar comfort of our house seemed unusually distant. Helen went upstairs to change and freshen up while I remained in the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was nearly 9 o'clock at night. The old grandfather clock in the dining room ticked steadily, filling the house with a sound that usually felt comforting. Tonight, it only emphasized how empty everything seemed. After a while, Helen came downstairs wearing her favorite gray sweater. She looked tired, older somehow. We sat together at the kitchen table without speaking much. Eventually, she forced a small smile and said she was going to bed early. Before heading upstairs, she squeezed my hand. "Please do not be angry," she said. "Emily had a beautiful wedding. Let us not ruin that memory." I promised her I would not. It was not a difficult promise to make because anger was not what I felt anymore. Anger is loud. What I felt was quiet, careful, observant. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Years of habit had trained my body to rise early. I brewed coffee and sat on the back porch watching the morning mist settle over our yard. For the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to replay the entire scene in my head. Every detail seemed sharper now. Ashley's expression, Ryan's laughter, the way several guests had exchanged uncomfortable looks. The more I thought about it, the less accidental the incident appeared. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller identification showed a number I did not recognize. I answered anyway. A woman's voice greeted me politely. "Mr. Whitmore, my name is Laura Jensen. I was the wedding photographer yesterday." I sat up straighter. "Yes." There was a brief pause before she continued. "I hope you do not mind me calling. I have been debating whether I should." Something in her tone immediately caught my attention. "What is this about?" Another pause. "It is about what happened to your wife." My grip tightened around the coffee mug. Laura explained that she had been reviewing photographs from the reception that morning. As part of her job, she captured hundreds of candid images throughout the day. Most people never noticed her moving through the crowd. She said several frames taken seconds before the incident had made her uncomfortable. I listened carefully as she chose her words. "There are things in those photographs that do not look accidental," she said quietly. For several seconds I said nothing. The birds chirping in the yard seemed unusually loud. Finally, I asked the question that had already formed in my mind. "What exactly did you see?" Laura took a slow breath. "I think you should come see the images yourself." I drove into Nashville later that afternoon and met Laura at her small photography studio on the edge of town. The place was quiet except for the hum of computer equipment and the faint sound of music playing somewhere in the background. Laura greeted me warmly and led me to a desk where several large monitors displayed hundreds of wedding photographs. For a moment, I saw only the happy parts of the day. Emily smiling as she walked down the aisle, guests laughing during the reception, families posing together beneath strings of white lights. Looking at those images, it was hard to believe that the same day had left such a bitter taste in my mouth. Laura clicked through folders until she reached a series of photographs taken near the garden walkway. "These were captured in continuous mode," she explained. "The camera was taking several images every second." My heart beat a little faster as the first photograph appeared on the screen. Helen was walking toward the reception area with a gentle smile on her face. In the next image, Ashley was approaching from behind. Nothing unusual at first glance. Laura clicked again, then again. The sequence continued frame by frame. The closer I looked, the more uneasy I became. Ashley was not simply walking past Helen. Her attention appeared completely focused on her. In one photograph, Ashley glanced toward a nearby group of guests. In another, her expression changed in a way that was difficult to explain. It was subtle, a small smirk, a look of anticipation. Then came the final frames before Helen lost her balance. Laura zoomed in. My stomach tightened. "Do you see it?" she asked quietly. I nodded slowly. Ashley's movement did not match the movement of someone accidentally brushing past another person. The images did not provide absolute proof of intent, but they raised questions that could not be ignored. Questions I knew Ashley would never answer honestly. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. I studied every detail on the screen. The position of their feet, the direction of their bodies, the reactions of nearby guests. One image in particular stood out. A woman standing several yards away looked directly toward Ashley with an expression of shock. She had clearly seen something that surprised her. Laura folded her hands. "I debated whether to call you," she admitted. "Most of the time I stay out of family matters. But your wife looked devastated, and these photographs have bothered me all morning." I thanked her for her honesty. Before leaving, I asked whether she could provide copies of the images. She agreed immediately. As she transferred the files onto a flash drive, she hesitated. "There is something else," she said. I looked up. "What is it?" Laura opened another folder and pulled up several photographs taken moments after the incident. In the background of one image, Ryan was visible. He was not rushing toward his mother. He was not checking on her. He was laughing while Ashley stood beside him. The image captured a moment that lasted less than a second, but it revealed more than words ever could. When I finally returned home that evening, Helen was reading in the living room. She smiled when she saw me walk through the door. The sight of her reminded me why any of this mattered. She deserved better than what had happened. She deserved better than excuses. I sat beside her and asked about her day. We talked about ordinary things for nearly an hour. The weather, Emily's honeymoon plans, a television show she enjoyed. I never mentioned the photographs. Not yet. Later that night, after Helen had gone upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen table and examined the flash drive again. The evidence did not bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. For years I had convinced myself that Ashley's behavior was merely thoughtlessness, that Ryan was simply avoiding conflict. Looking at those images, I could no longer pretend. What happened at the wedding was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern. And for the first time, I began wondering how many other moments I had missed over the years. That night, I barely slept. The photographs remained on my mind long after I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Helen was already asleep, breathing softly beside me, completely unaware of the storm that had begun forming in my thoughts. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself staring at the ceiling and replaying memories I had ignored for years. At the time, each incident had seemed too small to matter. A careless comment, a forgotten invitation, an awkward family gathering. But when enough small things point in the same direction, they eventually form a pattern. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner nearly 5 years earlier. Helen had spent 2 days preparing side dishes because Ashley insisted everyone bring something homemade. When we arrived, Ashley glanced at Helen's casserole dish and laughed. She told everyone she had already made the same recipe because she did not trust older cooking methods. Several guests chuckled politely. Helen smiled and said nothing. Later that evening, I found her quietly wrapping up most of the untouched food she had worked so hard to prepare. Then there was Emily's college graduation. Helen had been excited for months. She bought a new outfit and carefully planned the trip. Yet somehow our seats ended up separated from the rest of the family. Ashley blamed a ticketing mistake. Ryan accepted the explanation without question. Helen spent most of the ceremony sitting among strangers while the rest of the family sat together. Looking back, I could still remember the disappointment in her eyes. The following morning, I sat at the breakfast table watching sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. Helen hummed softly while making coffee, seemingly determined to move on from the wedding. That was her way. She always chose peace over conflict. As I watched her, another memory surfaced. 3 Christmases earlier, Ashley had organized matching family photographs. Everyone wore coordinated colors. Everyone except Helen. We had never received the message about the dress code. When we arrived, Ashley smiled and claimed she thought Ryan had told us. The family photograph still hangs in Emily's house. Every person fits perfectly into the color scheme except my wife. At the time, I believed it was carelessness. Now I was not so sure. Throughout the day, more memories emerged. Birthdays scheduled without telling us. Family group messages that somehow never reached Helen. Vacations discussed openly after plans had already been finalized. Each incident had an explanation. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they painted a different picture. Late that afternoon, I opened the flash drive again and examined the wedding photographs one more time. The images did not merely show what happened. They forced me to reconsider everything that came before. For years, I had given Ashley the benefit of the doubt because I wanted harmony. I convinced myself that Ryan was simply busy with work and family responsibilities. The truth was much harder to accept. Avoiding conflict had not protected Helen. It had only allowed the disrespect to continue. As evening approached, my phone vibrated with a text message from Ryan. It was the first message he had sent since the wedding. I opened it expecting some form of apology. Instead, the message read, "Hope Mom is not still upset. Tell her accidents happen." I stared at those words for a long time. Not once did he ask how she was feeling. Not once did he express concern. The message sounded less like a son checking on his mother and more like someone eager to close an uncomfortable subject. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked out the window toward the backyard. For the first time, I stopped asking whether I was imagining things. The question was no longer whether something was wrong. The question was how deep it went. And somewhere beyond the photographs, beyond the wedding, and beyond the years of subtle insults, I had a growing feeling that there was still much more I had not yet discovered. Over the next week, I stopped looking for explanations and started paying attention to facts. It was remarkable how much a person could notice once they stopped making excuses for others. Ryan called twice during that time. Both conversations were brief. He spoke about work, traffic, and ordinary things. Not once did he ask to speak with his mother directly. Not once did he mention the photographs, the wedding, or the embarrassment Helen had endured. The silence itself told me more than any argument could have. Meanwhile, Helen continued moving through her days with quiet grace. She watered her flowers every morning, attended church on Sunday, and mailed thank-you notes to relatives who had sent gifts for our anniversary. Watching her only strengthened my resolve. The more kindness she showed the world, the harder it became to ignore how little of it she received from certain members of her own family. One Thursday afternoon, another unexpected piece of information arrived. Emily stopped by the house on her way home from work. She looked tired. Newly married life seemed to suit her, but something was clearly weighing on her mind. After chatting with Helen for a while, she asked if she could speak with me privately on the back porch. The moment we sat down, I knew this was not a casual conversation. Emily stared at her hands before finally speaking. "Grandpa, can I ask you something honestly?" I nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. Have Ashley and Grandma always had problems? The question caught me off guard, though perhaps it should not have. I asked why she wanted to know. Emily sighed. Then she told me that several months before the wedding, she had overheard a conversation between Ashley and one of her friends during a bridal planning meeting. At the time, Emily thought nothing of it. Now she was not so sure. According to Emily, the discussion had turned to family seating arrangements and guest photos. Ashley had joked that older relatives always found a way to become the center of attention. Then she specifically mentioned Helen. Emily remembered the comment because it sounded unusually harsh. "I thought she was just having a bad day," Emily admitted. "But after what happened at the wedding, I keep replaying it in my head." I listened without interrupting. Emily looked genuinely upset. She loved her grandmother deeply and seemed troubled by the possibility that she had missed warning signs. Before leaving, she said something that stayed with me long after she drove away. "Grandpa, I do not think Grandma realizes how much she puts up with." That evening, I sat alone in my study reviewing everything I had gathered so far. The photographs, the witness statements, the old memories, Emily's observations. Each piece fit together too neatly to dismiss. Then I noticed something else. Every incident shared a common element. Whenever Ashley crossed a line, Ryan was always nearby. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he stayed silent. Sometimes he changed the subject. But he never defended his mother. Not once. That realization hurt more than anything Ashley had done. Disappointment from a daughter-in-law was painful. Disappointment from your own child reached somewhere deeper. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees outside my window, I opened my notebook and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote a single sentence. If people are willing to behave this way in public, what are they saying in private? I stared at those words for a long time. For reasons I could not fully explain, I felt certain the answer was coming. And when it did, I suspected it would reveal far more than anyone expected. 3 days later, the answer arrived in a way I never expected. Ryan called and invited Helen and me to dinner at his house the following Saturday. The invitation sounded unusually warm. He even insisted that Ashley wanted to put the wedding behind everyone and start fresh. Helen seemed relieved when she heard that. She immediately began talking about what dessert she should bring. Watching her optimism hurt more than I cared to admit. Part of me wanted to tell her everything I had learned. Another part knew she deserved one peaceful evening before facing a truth that would likely break her heart. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm weather. We drove the 25 miles to Ryan's neighborhood just before 6 o'clock. As soon as we walked through the front door, something felt different. Ashley greeted us with a smile that seemed almost rehearsed. Ryan was unusually attentive. They complimented Helen's outfit. They asked about her garden. They offered her favorite tea. If I had not spent the previous week gathering evidence, I might have believed the sudden kindness was genuine. Throughout dinner, I mostly listened. Ashley dominated the conversation, talking about future vacations, home renovations, and social events. Ryan nodded along, occasionally adding details. Helen smiled politely and tried to contribute whenever she could. Then something happened that changed everything. Halfway through the meal, Ashley stepped away to answer a phone call. A few minutes later, Ryan left the dining room to help her with something in the kitchen. They were gone longer than expected. Helen excused herself to use the restroom. For the first time all evening, I found myself sitting alone at the table. Voices drifted from down the hallway. I was not trying to listen. In fact, I would have preferred not to hear anything at all. But then Ashley laughed. The sound carried clearly through the quiet house. "She still has no idea," she said. My entire body went still. Ryan responded with a chuckle of his own. "Of course she does not," he replied. "Mom never notices anything." I felt my stomach tighten. The conversation continued. Their voices remained low, but several sentences reached me clearly enough. Ashley made a remark about how easy it was to keep Helen happy with a few compliments. Ryan agreed. Then Ashley said something that made my blood run cold. Honestly, after the wedding, I thought she would finally stop showing up to everything. Silence followed. Then Ryan laughed again. Not loudly, not cruelly, almost casually, as though discussing the weather. At that moment, years of doubt disappeared. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not poor communication. Not hurt feelings blown out of proportion. Contempt. Simple, undeniable contempt. I remained seated and kept my expression neutral as footsteps approached. A few seconds later, Ashley and Ryan returned carrying drinks and acting as though nothing had happened. Helen soon returned as well, completely unaware of the conversation that had taken place. The rest of the evening passed without incident. We discussed sports, neighborhood news, and Emily's honeymoon. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. Inwardly, nothing was normal anymore. On the drive home, Helen commented on how pleasant the evening had been. She said perhaps everyone was finally moving forward. I glanced at her sitting beside me in the darkness and felt an overwhelming sadness. Not because she was wrong, but because she still believed the best about people who had not earned that faith. When we reached home, and she went upstairs for the night, I remained in the living room staring at the family photographs lining the mantel. Ryan appeared in many of them. Birthday parties, fishing trips, Christmas mornings. Looking at those pictures, I remembered the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared. And for the first time, I realized the confrontation I had been preparing for was no longer about a wedding. It was about whether my son still deserved the trust his mother continued to place in him. The next morning, I stopped waiting for another piece of the puzzle to appear and decided it was time to put the pieces together myself. For nearly 2 weeks, I had collected photographs, witness accounts, memories, and conversations. None of them alone told the entire story. Together, they revealed something impossible to ignore. After breakfast, I drove to see Martin Keller, an attorney who had handled several legal matters for our family over the years. Martin was not only competent, he was discreet. More importantly, he was someone I trusted. I arrived carrying a folder filled with photographs, notes, and printed emails. Martin listened carefully as I explained everything from the wedding to the conversations that followed. He did not interrupt. He simply reviewed each document one by one. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "George," he said quietly, "the most important thing here is not the incident itself. It is the pattern." That word again. Pattern. The same conclusion everyone seemed to reach once they looked beyond a single event. Martin explained that families often become trapped by individual incidents. One rude comment can be dismissed. One embarrassing moment can be excused. One thoughtless joke can be forgiven. But repeated behavior over many years tells a different story. Before I left, he gave me advice that stayed with me. "Do not argue with people who are committed to denying reality," he said. "Show them reality instead." On the drive home, those words echoed in my mind. Show them reality instead. That evening, I sat with Helen on the back porch as the sun began setting behind the trees. She was reading one of her favorite novels. Every so often she would smile at something on the page and share a sentence she enjoyed. Watching her brought me a sense of calm. It also strengthened my determination. For years, she had protected everyone else's feelings. Now it was my turn to protect hers. The following day, I made several phone calls. First to Emily, then to Laura, the photographer, then to Carol. Each conversation was polite and straightforward. I asked whether they would be willing to attend a family gathering in a few weeks. None of them asked many questions. All of them agreed. By the end of the afternoon, a plan had begun taking shape. I told Helen that I wanted to host a special family dinner to celebrate our upcoming 50th wedding anniversary. Her eyes lit up immediately. She loved bringing family together. The idea filled her with excitement. She began discussing recipes, decorations, and guest lists before I had even finished explaining it. For the first time since the wedding, I saw genuine happiness return to her face. Meanwhile, Ryan and Ashley reacted exactly as I expected. When I called to invite them, they sounded unusually enthusiastic. Ryan even suggested making a toast in our honor. Ashley offered to help coordinate the event. Their eagerness confirmed what I already suspected. They believed the wedding had been forgotten. They believed no one had noticed the years of disrespect hiding beneath polite smiles and family photographs. Most of all, they believed they still controlled the story. As the anniversary dinner approached, I finalized every detail. The guest list, the seating arrangements, the presentation equipment Martin helped me secure. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just facts organized carefully and respectfully. One evening, a few days before the gathering, I opened the folder one last time. The photographs remained exactly where I had placed them. So did the witness statements and notes. Looking at them no longer filled me with anger. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because for the first time in years, I was no longer carrying doubts. I had clarity. And clarity is a powerful thing, especially when people have spent years counting on confusion to protect them. The evening of our anniversary dinner arrived with perfect weather. The house glowed with warm light, and the dining room was filled with family, friends, and a few carefully invited guests who had played important roles in the weeks leading up to that moment. Helen looked beautiful. She wore a navy blue dress and a smile that reminded me of the young woman I married nearly 50 years earlier. Watching her laugh with Emily in the kitchen made everything that followed worth it. Ryan and Ashley arrived right on time. They carried a gift basket and acted exactly as they always did when other people were watching. Polite, charming, attentive. Anyone seeing them for the first time would have thought they were the perfect son and daughter-in-law. Dinner passed pleasantly. Stories were shared. Glasses were raised. Helen thanked everyone for coming. Then, just before dessert, I stood and tapped my fork gently against my glass. The room fell quiet. I began by speaking about family, about loyalty, about kindness, about the importance of treating people with dignity, especially those who have spent their lives loving and supporting us. Everyone listened carefully. Ryan smiled. Ashley nodded. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. I then explained that our anniversary seemed like the perfect occasion to reflect on memories. With that, I turned on the television screen Martin had helped me set up. The first images appeared. Family photographs from over the years. Birthdays, holidays, vacations. Laughter filled the room as people recognized old pictures. Then the slideshow changed. The wedding photographs appeared. The room grew quieter. Laura's sequence of images played one after another, frame by frame. No accusations, no dramatic commentary, just photographs, facts. People leaned forward in their seats. Ashley's smile slowly disappeared. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Next came statements from witnesses who had agreed to share what they saw. Carol's observations. Other guests' concerns. Then came a photograph showing Ryan laughing while his mother struggled to recover from her humiliation. The silence that followed felt heavier than any speech I could have given. Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. The evidence spoke for itself. Helen looked stunned. Her eyes moved from the screen to Ryan and back again. I could see the pain in her expression, but I could also see something else. Understanding. For the first time, she was seeing the pattern she had spent years refusing to acknowledge. Ashley finally spoke. She claimed everything was being misunderstood. She insisted people were exaggerating. Ryan attempted to support her explanation, but the confidence they usually carried was gone. Too many facts stood in front of them. Too many people had seen too much. When they finished speaking, I simply looked at my son. Your mother spent her life loving you, I said quietly. And every time someone disrespected her, you chose silence. Ryan lowered his eyes. He had no answer. I was not interested in revenge. I was not interested in shouting. I was interested in truth. So I told them both what I had decided. Until they could demonstrate genuine accountability and respect, Helen and I would be stepping back from the relationship. No more pretending. No more excuses. No more accepting behavior that diminished the woman who had held this family together for decades. Emily stood and walked directly to her grandmother. She wrapped her arms around Helen and told her she was loved. One by one, other family members expressed similar support. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. For years, Helen had quietly carried burdens nobody fully recognized. That night, people finally saw them. Weeks later, life felt different. Quieter. Healthier. Ryan attempted several conversations. Whether real change would follow remained to be seen. But for the first time, accountability existed where denial once lived. As for Helen, something remarkable happened. The sadness she carried after the wedding gradually faded. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she finally understood that the problem had never been her. The mud from that day washed away long ago. The photographs were filed away. The conversations ended. Yet one truth remained. Respect cannot be demanded, but it can be protected. And after nearly 50 years of marriage, protecting Helen's dignity became the easiest decision I ever made.